Our last section for today's video clip is language and perception, which is on page 92 of your work, which is to look as is our perceptions, which is the way we interpret our reality, affected by our language? Do you believe that? When we communicate, we kind of paint pictures of what's, in our head, and when we are trying to communicate with others, we are imagining what we're saying. And this may influence how we think of people and, groups of people. And this is why it's often incorrect what we're thinking. We may have preconceptions of others based on the language we might have heard to describe them, which is why I've put on the example here on the right, a woman here in Hawaii. And you might think, oh yeah, people from Hawaii, they're so friendly. But have you ever been to Hawaii? Have you actually been there? They might say the people from South Africa are so nice and they don't know any better, for example. So other examples they have in the textbook is we might use the word quaint to describe the lifestyle people in Switzerland. However, we visit Zurich or Bernay, which is cities in Switzerland, we might be surprised to see the gleaming glass office buildings, everyone's talking on their cell phones, and a bustling metropolis. This sometimes happens when we meet people from another culture and are totally surprised at how nice they are. When asked, how many of these people do you actually know? The answer comes back, well, I've heard. So therefore, it's quite interesting that within your mind, you might hear things from people, you might do little, kind of superficial research, but you don't really understand, the culture, but you're just putting it all into your head that, yeah, people from Hawaii, they're so friendly, but we've never even been there. Therefore, we are deducing that perhaps, language does have effect on how you're thinking, creating that preconception out there. Okay, are we ready for the next section, which is the power effects of labels? Okay, I hope you're ready. Let's go to the next section. The power effects of labels. How labels to people can also affect how we are thinking. People use labels for others without knowledge, understanding their meanings and the origin of what they actually say. And there's quite a bit of examples here in the textbook from page 92 to 93. So labels, for example, here they say, Indians is used for people who originate from India, and that is their origin there. Also, Pakistan, Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka. People of color, excluding blacks and Indians, were labeled as coloreds in the Registration Act of 1950. And these are different subcultures within the umbrella term. There are other labels for coloreds that they put in here, which is Cape Coloreds, Griquas, Namas, Kronanas, Bastards or Bastards, Khoisan people. And many people accepted this label. There's also Brain Mensa, Khoisan, or just South Africans. And then during the struggle against apartheid, many so-called colors preferred to be called, just South Africans. And there's many more labels they do put in here that are quite derogatory for what they are standing for. And of course, one that is just put in here as well is the label of non-whites or people of color, indication of the apartheid time. Also to put in here to page 93 is most white people were referred to the label South African. Also in white Afrikaans speaking people also proud the label Boer, which means farmer. And these are all kind of backwards thinking, sort of in the apartheid time, a label of oppression during these times. There are other labels out there as well that's separate to, apartheid and, the race component, which is also labeling in terms of people as terrorists, freedom fighters, or patriots, and so on. They put in here. So you can read through the section, and it's just saying that when people have this label attached to them, does it hold power? Do we give the label power by, putting these labels? And now, obviously, they did have a lot of power back then, and they should be quite eliminated right now, but they still hang in the air as being there, and they're indicative of that time. Therefore, we can just deduce for now, in terms of this section, that language is then linked to social structure by what they're communicating through those labels. So I think I'm going to end it off there in terms of that. Labels tend to evoke that line of communication of what they do mean. When we go, and then I just want you to look at the what do you think on page 93. And we're going to move on now to our last section, which is the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. And it's just another hypothesis of how our perception is shaped by language. Language tends to define our experience. There's a lot of different examples here. They say, do English speakers see the world differently from Arabic speakers? And in terms of the writer for the National Geographic says, more than a cluster of words or set of grammatical rules, a language is a flash of the human spirit which the soul of a culture reaches into the material world. Does language have a determination on how we perceive reality? It's quite an interesting hypothesis here. They propose that language not only expresses by the idea, but the shapes of the ideas and the perception of the world. A good example here to point out is in the Setswana culture, there is no word for the word hermaphrodite. Thus, when the athlete Caster Semenya was initially disqualified not being a female, many Botswanans and other blacks thought there was something devious going on, as their language does not accommodate the concept of hermaphrodite. When a word is used that is unknown to us, we have to make inferences of what that word now means. When those inferences about a word's supposed meanings are emotional as to evoke conflict or strong feelings, the sharing of the meaning becomes a very difficult goal to achieve. When a word reflects on something personal as gender, the description of the word is projected as an invalidation of gender, and emotions are then stirred. So what they're meaning by this section is, in the Setswana culture, they do not have the word for hermaphrodite. Therefore, does the hermaphrodite, word concept exist? And it does exist, but what you do if a culture does not recognize that the word here is in the culture? It's very difficult then to kind of get a shared meaning of what's happening. Another example is when cultures are trying to express formality and informality depending on the language that you speak. And do speakers then think differently about, if there is no formality or is there formality there in the language? How do they express formality, for example? And lastly, just to conclude for this section, how close is the relationship between language and perception? For example, in the cultural groups, they may use different words for different colors. This means we can see the same colors, but we have different words to describe them, which goes back to our semantics. A recent study looked at the Manduruku people in rural villages in Brazil. They have no formal schooling and speak a language that has few words to describe the geometrical or spatial concepts, and they have no rulers, compasses, or maps. Researchers showed them diagrams with contents of various shapes and showed them the actual contents arranged in the same way. The researchers found that the Manduruku were easily able to relate the geometrical information on the diagram to the geometrical relationships on the ground. The language then is superior Wolff's hypothesis that language is not required to think about or perceive the world in a particular way. Thus, a more moderate view in which language is a tool to communicate rather than a mirror perception is probably more accurate. And in the examples, which we have quite a bit, and you're going to have to read through these examples because there's quite a bit of examples in this textbook, I'll just conclude here that they show that language we speak has a tremendous impact on what and how we communicate every day, and some very important implications for intercultural communication. Perhaps it's not just languages that are different, but it may mean that the members of the cultural group experience the world very differently, in a sense they have different perceptual words for those things. So in that way, they're saying that although language is there, to help it might necessarily shape your perception, not really required to perceive the world in a particular way. But it does mean that the culture has a different, sort of words for those things. And, therefore maybe just perceptual words. So it's kind of going a little bit back and forth there. Okay. I'm going to conclude here in this section. In our next section, we'll be looking at Learning Outcome 1.3, which is to discuss the role that language plays within the different cultures. Please look at the lesson plan and see those VC and textbook activities and also the videos, which is definitely going to help you and understand the components of language. Remember to write down the notes of any sections you do not understand and ask your lecturer for further understanding. Thank you so much.